You're sitting in a history class. The teacher draws a timeline on the board. It starts somewhere around 3000 BC. Ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, the first cities, the first kings, the first wars that were important enough that someone bothered to write them down. And you're staring at that timeline thinking, okay, but what about before that? What happened in the part that isn't on the board? Because here's the thing nobody tells you in that classroom. The part of the timeline that's on the board, that's roughly 5,000 years. And the part that isn't on the board, the part before writing, before cities, before anything we'd recognize as civilization, that's 300,000 years, at minimum. We spend almost all of our time studying the last 1.6% of human existence. The other 98.4% is just blank space on a whiteboard that nobody talks about. And that blank space is where almost everything that makes you human actually happened. Your ability to speak, your capacity for abstract thought, your instinct to tell stories and form friendships and feel grief and fall in love and get unreasonably invested in strangers. All of it came from that blank space. All of it was already ancient by the time the Egyptians picked up a reed and started writing things down. So what actually happened before history? The honest answer is more interesting, more violent, more strange, and more human than anything that made it into the textbook. Let's go back, all the way back, further than you think. Before we go anywhere, we need to deal with a word, history. Because history doesn't mean things that happened. It means things that were written down. That's it. That's the whole definition. The moment someone scratched a symbol into a clay tablet and that tablet survived, history began. Everything before that moment, no matter how dramatic, no matter how consequential, no matter how many millions of people lived and died and built things and loved things, all of it technically falls outside history. Historians call it prehistory, which is a slightly condescending word if you think about it. Prehistory, as if things didn't really count until someone documented them. As if the 300,000 years of fully modern human beings walking around on this planet doing genuinely extraordinary things were just a warm-up act for the main event. They weren't a warm-up act. They were the whole show. And we've been living in the epilogue ever since. We just don't have the receipts. What we have instead is archaeology, genetics, linguistics, climate science, paleoanthropology. A collection of disciplines that spend their lives reading evidence that was never meant to be read, pulling meaning from bones and seeds and fire ash and stone tools and the DNA of living populations to reconstruct a world that left almost nothing behind. And what they found is extraordinary. The oldest known fossils that qualify are from a site called Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, discovered and redated in 2017, pushing our origin story back significantly from what scientists previously believed. That finding changed things, because it means that for most of the time Homo sapiens has existed, our species was scattered across Africa in small, relatively isolated populations. Not one cradle, not one point of origin, a continent-wide slow-motion emergence across hundreds of thousands of years. We are not the ending point of human evolution. We are a moment in it. And before them, before Homo sapiens, there was a whole cast of characters. The family tree of humanity is not a straight line. It is a tangle, a messy, overlapping network of species that interbred and competed and occasionally wiped each other out, and sometimes did all three simultaneously. You are not the descendant of one ancient people. You are the product of a collision. Multiple lineages, multiple species, multiple evolutionary experiments that all converged in you. That's not a metaphor. That's genetics. Yes, there was a major dispersal out of Africa around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, but that wasn't the first time humans left Africa. Not even close. The reality is more like a long, slow, stuttering diaspora punctuated by failed attempts and successful ones, by populations that went out and died out, by groups that interbred with the human relatives they found already living in the places they arrived. The Neanderthals had been in Europe and Western Asia for at least 400,000 years before the first modern humans showed up.
They weren't waiting around doing nothing. They were making tools, they were burying their dead with apparent ritual, they were using pigments, possibly for body decoration, and then, within a geological heartbeat of modern humans arriving, they were gone. Modern humans who aren't from sub-Saharan Africa carry somewhere between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, which tells you something important about what the relationship between our species and theirs actually looked like, at least some of the time. The climate was trying to kill them, constantly, relentlessly. At glacial maximum, ice sheets covered enormous portions of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels dropped by 120 meters or more as water was locked into ice, exposing land bridges that connected places that are now separated by ocean. Britain was connected to Europe. Siberia was connected to Alaska. The geography of the world looked fundamentally different from a map you'd recognize today. There's a theory, still debated but taken seriously, that somewhere around 70,000 years ago, the eruption of the Toba supervolcano triggered a volcanic winter that lasted years and a cold snap that lasted decades, and that this event very nearly wiped humanity out. Some estimates put the total global human population at as low as 10,000 individuals at its nadir.
10,000 people, the entire human species, fitting comfortably in a large concert venue. That's how close we came. The survivors, whoever they were, wherever they were the ones with enough behavioral flexibility, enough social cohesion, enough accumulated knowledge to get through something that killed almost everyone else. We are not an inevitable species. We are a fortunate one. By the time Homo sapiens had been around for a few 100,000 years, the evidence we have suggests a species that was behaviorally modern in almost every way that matters. People were making and using complex composite tools. They were traveling long distances to obtain specific raw materials. Someone carried it, purposefully, which means they knew they wanted it before they had it, which means they had a concept of the future and a plan for it. They were decorating things. Engraved geometric patterns appear on ochre pieces from Blombo's cave dating to 75,000 years ago. Shell beads, pierced and strung, appear in North Africa dating to 130,000 years ago. Someone made those, someone wore them, someone looked at another person wearing them and understood what they communicated. They were burying their dead with apparent intentionality, not disposed of, laid to rest. Something about that distinction mattered to the people who did it. Somewhere, sometime, in Africa before history began, people were sitting around fires, talking about what happened today, about what might happen tomorrow, about someone who died and what they meant, about the animal that got away, about the dream they had. The cave paintings of Chauvet in France, some of the oldest known, date to around 36,000 years ago. They're not crude, they're not primitive, they're extraordinary. The artists used perspective, they depicted animals in motion, they understood how to use the contours of the cave wall to create three-dimensional effect. The flutes found at sites in Germany, made from bird bone and mammoth ivory, dating to around 40,000 years ago, are the oldest known musical instruments. Someone took the time, took the materials, took the care to build an object whose only function was to make sound that moved people emotionally. Because there are things that can only be said in sound. The first formers were, on most measurable dimensions, worse off than the hunter-gatherers they replaced. They were shorter, their teeth were worse, they suffered more infectious disease, they worked harder, they had less leisure time. Hunter-gatherers knew this. There's evidence from multiple archaeological sites that communities on the edge of agricultural regions resisted farming for thousands of years. Because farming scales, and scaling changes everything. More people means more labor. More labor means more surplus. More surplus means some people can stop farming and do something else. It created hierarchy at a scale that had never existed before. It created the concept of land ownership. It created debt and taxation and organized religion and professional armies. And it created writing. And when writing appeared, history began. The blank space on the whiteboard isn't empty. It's full of everything we don't know we've forgotten.
The people who lived before history were not waiting to be rescued from their own lives by the invention of literacy. They were living fully, thinking deeply, creating meaning. And most of what they built, most of what they knew, most of what they created is gone. It lived in people, in memory, in practice, in the stories told around fires that nobody wrote down because writing hadn't been invented yet. You exist at the very far end of an extraordinarily long chain of people who survived things they shouldn't have survived. The bottleneck that nearly ended us 70,000 years ago. The glacial winters that lasted centuries. The famines and predators and diseases that had no names yet and no treatments. Every single person in that chain made it through something. The behavioral instincts you carry, the need for social connection, the compulsive storytelling, the pattern recognition, none of that is cultural, none of it is modern, all of it is ancient. They didn't know they were building you, they were just trying to get through the day. History is the last 5,000 years. What happened before history is what made history possible, and what made you.